The crystal ballroom of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel shimmered like a jewel beneath the glow of three magnificent chandeliers. Sophia Bennett smoothed her simple black dress, a vintage piece she'd found at a thrift boutique, and tried to ignore the way her heart hammered against her ribs. Around her, women draped in designer gowns worth more than her annual salary as an art therapist glided past, their jewelry catching the light like captured stars. "You're fidgeting," came a warm, familiar voice beside her. Sophia turned to find Alexander Sterling watching her with those penetrating gray eyes that had first captivated her 3 months ago in a small coffee shop downtown. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tailored black tuxedo, though she'd learned that Alexander always appeared effortlessly elegant, whether in designer suits or the simple jeans and sweaters he wore during their quiet dates. "I don't belong here," she whispered, her fingers unconsciously playing with the modest pearl necklace, her grandmother's, that felt woefully inadequate compared to the diamonds surrounding them. Alexander's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her trembling ones. The simple touch sent warmth racing up her arm, just as it had that first day when he'd accidentally brushed her hand while reaching for his coffee. "You belong wherever you choose to be, Sophia, and I want you here with me." His thumb traced gentle circles across her knuckles, a gesture so intimate that it made her breath catch. They'd shared many such moments over the past months, stolen touches, lingering glances, conversations that stretched until dawn. Yet there remained an air of mystery about Alexander that both intrigued and unsettled her. He was successful, that much was clear, but he deflected questions about his work with charming skill. "The Children's Foundation means a great deal to me," he continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "But having you here tonight means more." A server approached with champagne, and Alexander accepted 2 glasses, handing one to Sophia. Their fingers brushed again during the exchange, and she noticed how his eyes darkened slightly, a look she'd come to recognize as barely restrained desire. "Tell me about the foundation," she said, partly to distract herself from the way his presence affected her, partly from genuine curiosity about this glimpse into his private world. "We provide art therapy programs for children in hospitals," Alexander explained, his free hand finding the small of her back, a possessive yet gentle touch that made her lean slightly into him. "Your work inspired me to get more involved. The way you described helping children express their trauma through creativity, it stayed with me." Sophia's heart fluttered. In their months together, Alexander had proven to be an attentive listener, remembering details about her work that even her closest friends sometimes forgot. But she'd never imagined her modest job had influenced his philanthropy. "Alexander Sterling?" A portly man in an expensive suit approached, his eyes bright with recognition. "I didn't expect to see you here. Usually you just send a check." Something shifted in Alexander's demeanor, a subtle straightening, a coolness that settled over his features. "Pleasure to see you, Henderson. I decided tonight called for a more personal approach." His hand pressed more firmly against Sophia's back, and she realized he was claiming her, marking his territory in the subtle way of powerful men. The realization should have annoyed her, but instead, it sent an unexpected thrill through her system. As Henderson walked away, clearly hoping for more conversation that didn't materialize, Sophia studied Alexander's profile. Who was that? No, unimportant. Alexander's attention returned fully to her, his gray eyes warming again. "Dance with me?" Without waiting for an answer, he led her onto the marble dance floor where other couples swayed to the string quartet's romantic melody. Alexander pulled her closer than was probably appropriate for such a formal event, but Sophia didn't care. Here, in his arms, the intimidating crowd faded away. "Better," he murmured against her ear, his breath sending shivers down her spine. "Much," she admitted, allowing herself to melt into his embrace. As they moved together in perfect synchronization, Sophia felt the last of her anxiety dissolve. Perhaps she didn't need to understand all of Alexander's mysteries tonight. Perhaps it was enough to be held by this enigmatic man who somehow made her feel like the most important person in the room, even surrounded by society's elite. She had no idea that across the ballroom someone from her past was watching with bitter, calculating eyes. Part 2. Ghosts from the Past. The evening had been perfect until Sophia spotted him. Derek Morrison stood near the auction display, his arm wrapped possessively around a stunning redhead in an emerald green gown that probably cost more than Sophia's rent. Even from across the room, she could see the familiar, arrogant tilt of his head, the way he commanded attention from the small group surrounding him. Her body went cold despite Alexander's warm hand still resting on her waist. Sophia? Alexander's voice held immediate concern. He followed her gaze and his expression hardened imperceptibly. Someone you know? My ex, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. Derek Morrison. I didn't think. He doesn't usually attend charity events. Alexander's grip tightened protectively. We can leave. No. Sophia straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from Alexander's solid presence. I won't run. Besides, maybe he won't even notice. Well, if it isn't little Sophia Bennett. Derek's voice cut through her hopes like a blade. He'd approached without her noticing, the redhead clinging to his arm with perfectly manicured nails. Up close, Sophia could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the familiar mean glint in his dark eyes that appeared whenever he'd been drinking. Derek. Sophia kept her voice steady, though her heart raced. I didn't expect to see you here. I bet you didn't. His gaze raked over her dismissively before settling on Alexander with obvious calculation. Vanessa, darling, meet my ex-girlfriend. The one I told you about who used to waitress at that dive bar downtown. Vanessa Cross looked Sophia up and down with barely concealed disdain. Oh, the charity case. How quaint. Alexander stepped slightly forward, his presence suddenly commanding in a way Sophia had never seen before. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made Derek's eyes narrow. I don't believe we've been introduced. Derek Morrison, Morrison Investment Group. Derek extended his hand with practiced arrogance. And you are? Alexander Sterling. The name hung in the air like a dropped stone. Derek's confident expression flickered, and Sophia noticed several nearby conversations pause. Even Vanessa's. Grip on Derek's arm loosened slightly. Sterling, Derek repeated, his voice carefully controlled. As in Sterling Technologies? Alexander's smile was polite but cold. Among other ventures. Sophia felt the undercurrent of tension but didn't fully understand it. She'd heard of Sterling Technologies, everyone had, but Alexander had never mentioned. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Alexander Sterling. The Alexander Sterling. The man whose company was worth billions, who'd been featured on the cover of Forbes, whose technological innovations had revolutionized 3 different industries. Derek recovered quickly, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. How fascinating. Tell me, Sterling, how did you meet our little Sophia? I imagine the circumstances were quite different from your usual social circle. Careful, Morrison. Alexander's tone remained conversational, but something dangerous lurked beneath the surface. Oh, I'm just curious, Derek continued, emboldened by alcohol and Vanessa's encouraging squeeze. You see, Sophia has very particular tastes when it comes to men. She's always been drawn to, well, let's call it financial security. It's remarkable how quickly she's moved up in the world. Derek, please, Sophia started, her cheeks burning. I mean, from a waitress dating a mid-level investment banker to landing a tech billionaire? Derek's voice rose, drawing more attention. That's quite an impressive climb, even for someone with Sophia's talents. The insult hung in the air like poison. Sophia felt the eyes of nearby guests turning toward them, whispers beginning to ripple through the crowd. Her face burned with humiliation, the same crushing shame she'd felt during their relationship whenever Derek had belittled her in public. "You always did have a gift for public scenes," she said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Just calling it like I see it, sweetheart." Derek's smile was cruel. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious about your methods. Did you practice the vulnerable artist routine, or does it come naturally?" Alexander moved then, positioning himself directly between Derek and Sophia, his body language shifting into something predatory. "That's enough." "Is it?" Derek stepped closer, his judgment clearly impaired by alcohol and his own vindictive nature. "Or are you just now realizing what kind of woman you're dealing with? Trust me, Sterling, I know her better than anyone. Sophia Bennett is nothing but a gold-digging—" The slap echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Derek's head snapped to the side, his hand immediately rising to his reddening cheek. The entire room seemed to freeze, conversations dying mid-sentence, as hundreds of eyes turned toward their small group. Sophia's own hand stung from the impact, her chest heaving with 3 years' worth of suppressed anger and humiliation. "How dare you!" she breathed, her voice shaking with fury. "How dare you reduce me to your own twisted assumptions!" Derek's eyes blazed with rage and embarrassment. In that moment, with all of high society watching, his careful facade crumbled. Completely. His hand rose, and Sophia saw the intent in his eyes a split second before his palm connected with her cheek. The sound seemed to reverberate through the crystal chandeliers themselves. Sophia's head turned from the force, tears springing to her eyes from both the physical sting and the crushing humiliation. The ballroom fell into absolute, horrified silence. Derek stood frozen, his hand still raised, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd done. Vanessa gasped, stepping back in shock. And Alexander looked like death itself. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Alexander stood perfectly still, but Sophia could feel the fury radiating from him like heat from a forge. When he finally moved, it was with the controlled precision of a predator who had just selected his prey. "You made a mistake," Alexander said, his voice so quiet that only their immediate circle could hear him. Yet somehow, his words carried more menace than if he had shouted. Derek's bravado crumbled as he seemed to realize the magnitude of what he'd done. "Now listen here, Sterling." "No." Alexander stepped closer, and despite Derek being slightly taller, he somehow seemed to shrink under Alexander's presence. "You listen. You just struck a woman in front of 300 witnesses, including half the city's legal and business community. You've shown everyone exactly what kind of man you are." Alexander's hand found Sophia's, his thumb gently brushing over her knuckles, such a tender gesture amidst the tension that it made her eyes well up again. "Are you hurt?" he asked her, his voice completely different now, soft and caring. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her cheek still stung and her pride felt shattered. Alexander nodded, then turned back to Derek with that same deadly calm. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave, now, and you're never going to come." Within 50 feet of Sophia again, Derek's face flushed red. "You can't tell me what to do. I don't care how much money you have." "Don't you?" Alexander's smile was sharp as a blade. "Because I think you do. I think you care very much about your position at Morrison Investment Group. I think you care about your membership at the Whitmore Club, about your invitations to events like this, about your reputation in this city's financial district." The color began to drain from Derek's face. "Touch her again," Alexander continued, his voice still conversationally quiet, "and I'll make sure you never work in finance again. Not in this city, not in this state, not anywhere that my influence reaches. And Morrison, My influence reaches very, very far. You're threatening me? Derek's voice cracked slightly. I'm making you a promise. Security appeared then, as if summoned by some invisible signal. Two large men in dark suits approached with professional discretion. Mr. Sterling, one of them said quietly, please escort Mr. Morrison and his guest. Out, Alexander said without taking his eyes off Derek. They were just leaving. Derek looked around desperately, perhaps hoping for support from the crowd, but found only cold, disapproving stares. Even Vanessa had stepped away from him, clearly wanting no part of whatever consequences were about to unfold. This isn't over. Sterling! Derek hissed as security flanked him. Yes, Alexander replied with finality. It is. As Derek was led away, his protests echoing through the ballroom, the crowd slowly began to resume their conversations, though many eyes remained on Alexander and Sophia. Alexander seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on her. Let's get you some air, he said gently, guiding her toward the terrace doors. The cool night air was a relief after the suffocating atmosphere inside. Alexander led her to a quiet corner of the terrace, away from the few other guests who had stepped outside. The city sparkled below them, but Sophia barely noticed. I'm sorry, she said, the words tumbling out. I'm so sorry you had to see that I brought drama. To your event, Sophia, no. Alexander cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. None of that was your fault. None of it. But Derek was right about some things, she whispered, unable to meet his eyes. I am just a waitress. Well, art therapist now, but still, I don't come from money, I don't belong in this world. Stop! Alexander's thumbs brushed away tears she didn't realize had fallen. Look at me. Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. Derek Morrison is a small, petty man who hurt you because he could. His opinion means nothing to me, and it should mean nothing to you. His gray eyes were fierce with conviction. You belong wherever you choose to be, and I want you to choose to be with me. Even after tonight. Even knowing that people will talk, will wonder what you're doing with someone like me? Alexander's laugh was low and surprisingly warm. Sophia, darling, I've spent years avoiding society events because I couldn't stand the shallow conversations and meaningless connections. Do you think I care what those people think? His hand slipped down to her shoulders, his touch burning through the thin fabric of her dress. What I care about is the woman who spends her weekends volunteering at the children's hospital, the woman who cried watching a romantic movie last week and tried to hide it, the woman who makes me laugh, who challenges me, who makes me want to be better. He leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. The woman I'm falling in love with. Sophia's breath caught. Alexander, I should have told you who I was, he admitted. I should have prepared you better for nights like this. But I was selfish. I loved that you saw me as just Alexander, not Sterling Technologies or Forbes covers or stock prices. I'm scared, she whispered honestly. This world, your world, it's so different from anything I know. Then we'll learn it together, he said, his voice full of quiet determination. But first, let me show Derek Morrison exactly what happens when someone hurts the woman I love. Inside his jacket, Alexander's phone had been buzzing steadily. He pulled it out, glancing at the messages with a satisfaction that would have terrified. Derek, had he seen it? What are you doing? Sophia asked, noticing his expression. Alexander's smile was both tender toward her and ruthlessly cold toward his absent target. Making good on a promise. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her as they stood overlooking the glittering city. By tomorrow morning, Derek Morrison will understand that some mistakes have permanent consequences. Sophia should have been troubled by the deadly certainty in his voice. Instead, she felt only a deep, warming sense of being completely utterly protected. Sophia woke to sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander's penthouse, momentarily disoriented by the luxury surrounding her. They hadn't made love the night before. Alexander had been too concerned about her emotional state, too focused on simply holding her while she processed the evening's events. But she had stayed, curled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat until sleep finally claimed her. Now, wrapped in one of his silk robes that dwarfed her small frame, she found him in his study, speaking quietly into his phone. His voice carried that same authoritative tone she'd witnessed the night before, and she caught fragments of conversation about terminated contracts and immediate effect. When he noticed her, his expression softened instantly. "I'll call you back," he told whoever was on the line, then crossed to her with 2 cups of coffee. "Good morning," he said, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm living in someone else's life," she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Alexander, what happened last night after we left? Your phone kept buzzing." His jaw tightened slightly. "Derek Morrison no longer works for Morrison Investment Group. As of 8 this morning, he's been terminated for conduct detrimental to the company's reputation." Sophia stared at him. "How is that possible? It's been less than 12 hours. Morrison Investment Group depends heavily on Sterling Technologies for their tech sector investments," Alexander explained matter-of-factly. "When I expressed my concerns about Derek's behavior to their senior partners, they acted swiftly to protect their business relationships. You got him fired." "It wasn't a question. I made a few phone calls. His actions last night were inexcusable, Sophia. No man should ever lay a hand on a woman, especially not in public, in front of witnesses who can testify to his character." Sophia sank into a leather chair, overwhelmed. "I never wanted revenge. I just wanted him to leave me alone." Alexander knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "This isn't revenge, darling. It's consequences. Derek chose to publicly assault you after verbally degrading you in front of influential people. The legal and business communities take such behavior seriously." His phone buzzed again, and he glanced at it with grim satisfaction. "The Whitmore Club has also revoked his membership. Apparently several witnesses from last night are on their board." "Alexander, stop." Sophia's voice was shaky. "This is too much. Yes, Derek was horrible, but destroying his entire career is exactly what he deserves," Alexander said firmly. "Sophia, you're thinking like someone who's been conditioned to accept mistreatment. Derek didn't just insult you last night, he physically struck you in front of hundreds of people. In any civilized society, that has consequences." She looked up at him, this man who wielded such incredible power so casually. "Is this what it means to be with you? Having enemies destroyed with phone calls?" Alexander's expression grew serious. "It means being with someone who will protect you, always. It means never having to face bullies alone again." He paused, his gray eyes searching her face. "It means being with someone who loves you enough to use every resource at his disposal to keep you safe." "You said that word again," she whispered. "Love, because I mean it." Alexander's hands cupped her face with infinite tenderness. "I've spent years building walls around myself, keeping people at a distance because of my wealth and what it attracts. But you saw past all of that from the first day we met." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "You argued with me about art, remember? That first afternoon in the coffee shop. You told me my taste in paintings was technically proficient but emotionally sterile." No one had spoken to me like that in years. Despite everything, Sophia smiled at the memory. "I can't believe I said that to a customer. I bought 3 paintings from your recommendation that week," Alexander admitted. "Not because I agreed with your assessment, but because I was fascinated by someone who would challenge a stranger's artistic opinion so passionately. And now I think you were absolutely right. They hang in my bedroom. The first things I see every morning, the last things I see at night. They remind me of you. Sophia felt her resolve wavering, the tenderness in his voice, the gentle way he touched her, the complete focus he gave her when they were together. It all felt so real, so different from the casual cruelty she'd experienced with Derek. I'm scared, she admitted. Last night showed me how different our worlds are. The way people looked at me, the assumptions they made, will change, Alexander said with quiet certainty. Sophia, I've been thinking about this all morning. I've been selfish, keeping our relationship private, not preparing you for situations like last night. He stood and walked to his desk, returning with a small velvet box that made Sophia's heart stop. This isn't a proposal, he said quickly, seeing her expression. Not yet, but it's a promise. He opened the box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring, surrounded by diamonds. I want the world to know you're mine. I want you by my side at every event, every board meeting, every moment that matters. Alexander, I know it's fast. I know last night was traumatic and you need time to process. But I also know what I feel, and I know what I want. His voice grew husky with emotion. I want you, Sophia Bennett. Not despite your background, but because of who you are. Because you make me laugh. Because you challenge me. Because you see the man instead of the bank account. Sophia stared at the ring, at this man who was offering her a life she'd never dared dream of. What about Derek? What if he tries something else? Alexander's smile turned predatory. Derek Morrison will be very busy trying to salvage what's left of his reputation. Besides, his expression softened as he looked at her. He'd have to go through me to get to you. And after last night, I think he understands exactly what that would cost him. The morning sun caught the sapphire, sending blue light dancing across the walls. Sophia thought about her small apartment, her modest life, the way she'd always felt like she was reaching for something just out of grasp. Then she looked at Alexander, really looked at him, not the billionaire, not the powerful businessman, but the man who held her when she cried, who listened to her stories about difficult children at the therapy center, who made her feel beautiful and valued and protected. Ask me again in a month, she said finally. Alexander's smile was radiant. The ring will be waiting. As he slipped it back into the box, Sophia made a decision. She was tired of being afraid, tired of letting other people's expectations define her worth. If Alexander Sterling wanted her by his side, then that's where she would stand. Derek Morrison could face the consequences of his choices. She had her own future to build. 3 weeks later, Sophia stood in Alexander's private office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and crimson. The view still took her breath away, though she was beginning to feel more at home in the rarefied air of Alexander's world. Penny for your thoughts. Alexander's voice came from behind her, followed by the familiar warmth of his arms encircling her waist. Just thinking about how much has changed, she said, leaning back against his chest. 3 weeks ago, I was terrified of your world. Now? He prompted, his lips brushing her ear in a way that sent shivers down her spine. Now I'm starting to see it's not about the world at all. It's about the man who holds my place in it. Alexander turned her in his arms, his gray eyes dark with emotion. And Derek? Hasn't bothered me once, Sophia admitted. The reports had filtered back through mutual acquaintances. Derek had been forced to take a position with a small firm in another state, his reputation in the city's financial circles irreparably damaged. Vanessa had left him the day after his termination. I almost feel sorry for him. Don't, Alexander said firmly. He made his choices. We all have to live with the consequences of our actions. Is that what you told yourself when you systematically destroyed his career? Alexander's expression didn't change. I told myself that no one hurts the woman I love and walks away unchanged. I'd do it again, Sophia. I'd do worse if anyone tried to harm you. The intensity in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in her stomach. Over the past weeks, she'd discovered that Alexander's protective nature extended far beyond business dealings. He was possessive in the most intoxicating way, not controlling but utterly devoted to her well-being and happiness. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his desk drawer. Sophia's heart skipped. Alexander, if that's the ring again? I told you. It's not. He pulled out a thick envelope. Though we should discuss that soon. Curious, Sophia opened the envelope to find legal documents. As she read, her eyes widened. A partnership agreement? Alexander, this is for a new foundation. The Bennett Foundation for Children's Art Therapy? $50 million in initial funding, Alexander said, watching her reaction carefully. Enough to establish programs in 12 major children's hospitals across the country, with you as the executive director. Sophia stared at the papers, overwhelmed. You can't give me $50 million? I'm not giving you anything, Alexander said patiently. I'm investing in a program I believe in, run by someone whose expertise and passion I trust completely. The foundation will be yours to run as you see fit. But why? She whispered. Alexander cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle but his gaze intense. Because I love you. Because your work matters. Because I want to build a life with you where we can make a difference together. A life together, she repeated softly. Which brings me to my next question. Alexander stepped back and, to Sophia's shock, dropped to one knee. The sapphire ring appeared again, but this time his intention was unmistakable. Sophia Bennett, he said, his voice slightly rough with emotion. You walked into my life and changed everything. You made me remember what it feels like to laugh, to hope, to want something more than the next business acquisition. Tears began to flow down Sophia's cheeks. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine. I want to protect you, cherish you, challenge you, and be challenged by you for the rest of our lives. I want to give you everything I have to offer. Not just my wealth, but my heart, my devotion, my complete and absolute love. He held up the ring, his hands perfectly steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Will you marry me? Sophia looked down at this incredible man who had transformed her life, who had shown her what it meant to be truly valued and protected. She thought of Derek's cruel words, of her own insecurities, of all the reasons she might not be good enough for someone like Alexander Sterling. Then she thought of the way Alexander looked at her every morning, like she was the most beautiful sight in his world. She thought of his quiet strength, his unwavering support, his complete faith in her abilities. She thought of the foundation documents in her hands, not just a generous gift, but a recognition of her worth, her expertise, her potential. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Alexander, yes, I'll marry you. The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, the sapphire catching the last rays of sunset. Alexander rose and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around his office while she laughed through her tears. When he finally set her down, his kiss was deep and claiming, full of promise and desire and complete, overwhelming love. I have one condition, Sophia said when they finally broke apart. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Anything. The next time someone threatens me at a charity gala, I get to handle it myself first. Alexander's laugh was rich and warm. Deal, though I reserve the right to destroy them professionally afterward. I wouldn't expect anything less, Sophia said, then pulled him down for another kiss. Outside the windows, the city lights began to twinkle like stars, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy planning their future, a future built on love, trust, and the absolute certainty that together they could face anything. Derek Morrison was forgotten, relegated to the past where he belonged. Sophia Bennett was about to become Sophia Sterling, and she had never been more ready for anything in her life. In Alexander's arms, with his ring on her finger and his love surrounding her like armor, she finally understood what it meant to be completely, utterly protected, not just from the world's cruelties, but cherished for exactly who she was. The fairy tale was just beginning.